Okay, Ryan and Kiwana, you guys are up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kiwana Jordan, and I will go ahead and get started with the presentation. So first, what are project-based vouchers? So project-based vouchers are a part of our HCV program. We are able to set aside 20% of our voucher allocation to project-based vouchers with the goal of deconcentrating poverty and expanding housing and economic opportunities. So with project-based vouchers, a little different from tenant-based vouchers. The subsidy is tied to the unit for 1 year, but no more than 15 years. Similar to the tenant-based voucher, the tenant will pay 30% of their adjusted gross income, and DCA will pay the remaining of their rent. Um, So the way that it works, the HAP contract, you look to the right, the HAP contract is the contract between DCA and the landlord. The lease is the contract between the tenant and the landlord. And the voucher is the contract between the tenant and DCA, the agency. Um, and we all fall up under the umbrella of HUD. So, how can project-based vouchers help your property? So some of the best ways to explain how a project-based voucher can help your property is a consistent payment. First and foremost, PBVs may be more attractive to landlords simply because they're guaranteed payment on the first of the month. If the family does not have income, then the housing authority will pay the full contract rent. In addition to that, supplemental operating revenue, it allows properties to have consistent additional income to help maintain the property with any funding shortages that may arise. And you also have the ability to layer um, PPV with any other subsidy types, such as home and low income tax credits. And ultimately, it improves the affordability options for your community and specific qualifying residents, excuse me. So some examples for value add of PBVs. Um, it allows us to increase our payment standard up to 110% of the small area market rent. If we are able to increase our payment standard up to 110%, then we're able to increase that contract rent. So for example, the one bedroom for the zip code 3003 is one the 1,790. I'm sorry, yeah, 170.90. If we're able to increase, if we're able to use the 110%, increase our smart area market by 110%, then we're able to increase that contract rent to the full amount of 1969. But we also have to keep in mind that 1969 is based on the comparables in the area. All right. So what residents are eligible? Based on our admin plan, it requires that they have a low income under 80% AMI, very low income less than 50% AMI, and extremely low income less than 30%. Per HUD, it is required that 75% of our wait list is extremely low income. Something new that we've implemented, properties are able to manage their own wait list. However, we are still determining eligibility and making sure that they're suitable for the program. Um, in establishing these wait lists, the properties must also follow our admin plan for guidance, outreach, and notification, including first notifying us of the tenant-based wait list and availability. But the properties will have the support of a housing specialist here at DCA to process eligibility determinations for the property maintained wait list. For the leasing in place, with the example below, we have the ability to convert those units to project based to get a higher market rent as long as the unit passes inspection and that there is an eligible person in that unit. So what units qualify? So first and foremost, the units that meet housing quality standards, um, units for families in line with our subsidy standards, at least 15 units and no more than 25% of the units. I want to mention that if more than 25% of the units requested, DCA requires supportive services on site. If you are a owner or a developer and you have multiple properties that you are applying for, and the sum is more than 15 units, we would consider your properties for project-based vouchers. And right now, I will pass it over to Ryan Smith.
Thank you, Kiwana. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith. So jumping into DCA subsidy standards are how we determine bedroom sizes for families. DCA will enforce our administrative plan on how bedroom sizes are determined. So the graph that you see in front of, or the chart you see in front of you, you'll see that for one bedroom, there's 1 to 2 people, 2 bedrooms, 2 to 4 people, and so on. That's how it's kind of an overview of how we avoid families being overhoused or underhoused. However, we drill in a little bit more when it comes to the policies that surround our subsidy standards. So we'll share that information. It's part of our administrative plan. As we receive applications and receive tenant selection plans, we'll make sure that everyone has a copy of our subsidy standard policy. Uh, Rule of thumb, we assign a bedroom to the head of household. That bedroom may be shared with a spouse or an infant. And then it's basically 2 heartbeats per bedroom thereafter, with a few exceptions. We also make exceptions for reasonable accommodations and, of course, for live-in aids. Again, when we get closer to reviewing applications and reviewing tenant selection plans, we'll make sure that everyone receives a thorough copy of our subsidy standards. All right. So for our rents, as Kiwana mentioned, we pay up to 100, or our payment standards are set to 110% of our small area fair market rents. So we, of course, will receive your request with what your requested rent amount is. We'll do a rent determination by comparing or comparable units in the area to make sure that the rents aren't exceeding common rents in the area. For rural areas of Georgia, we do expand our search beyond the 3 to 5 mile average that is generally used in non-rural areas. So when a tenant moves in, whether it's lease in place or if it's going to be a new admission, the rent will be determined at that time. The contract rents are set in the HAP contract, and then from there, it'll be based on their lease date. So if they move in on the 5th of the month and there's 30 days in the month, we'll prorate the rent based on 25 days. If they are in the unit on the 1st of the month, of course, the first month's contract, the first month's rent will be based on the contract rent. I'm sorry. All right, so DCA's jurisdiction. So most people know that DCA's Housing Choice Voucher Program only covers the balance of state, which is the 149 counties on this map that are shown in color. The green up top represents the North region, which is administered out of our Atlanta office. The yellowish color at the bottom is administered out of our Southern Regional Office, Waycross. Since the launch of this initiative to expand our PBV portfolio and expand housing opportunities, we've been partnering or attempting to partner with the PHAs that cover the counties outside of our jurisdiction. And some of the cities within our jurisdiction that they have their own housing choice voucher program. So right now we are working closely with areas such as City of Atlanta, Marietta, Savannah, Brunswick, and a few others. Another big one is Albany that we've been working closely with to allow or to enter an MOU to allow developers and property owners in their jurisdictions to apply for our project-based vouchers. So anyone who has a property within one of those areas that we may not cover as part of the balance of state will or may be eligible soon to apply once we execute those MOUs with those partnering jurisdictions.
Yeah, Ryan, one other one I want to add, we're also in conversations with the Housing Authority of DeKalb County as well. If you see your local housing authority not listed, but you know they have their own voucher program, please reach out to us and them to make sure that your property could be considered in the cycle.
Thank you, Laura. So voucher allocation. So DCA's HCV program has just over 17,000 vouchers. As many people who are familiar with the program know, we can use 20% of our voucher allocation toward project-based, which gives us an average of about 3,500 units that we are eligible to project-based. Currently, we have just under 500 units currently under a PBV HAP contract. So we are looking to probably add about 3,000 more to our portfolio over the next several years. In addition to those 3,500 units, we are eligible to add an additional 10%, specifically for supportive housing developments. So that's just to give you an idea of what our what's available to be applied for. We don't intend on, we don't expect to have all 3,500 under contract during this application period. It would be nice, but we do plan to have future solicitations of PBVs where whatever's not used will be available in the future. Thank you.
All right, so now we'll get into this year's 2024 application cycle. I also noted this in the chat, but we will again take all questions at the end. So please keep them coming. You guys are asking great questions, but if it's not covered in the additional material that we're about to present, we'll talk about it at the end of the presentation. So who qualifies to receive project-based vouchers, and then how could they get them? We've got a lot of different types of property owners on the call today. And so we'll talk through how things might look different for different types of developments. The first bucket of potential applicants is LIHTC awardees from 2021 to present. HUD regulation allows us to award project-based vouchers without competition to a development that has already been competitively selected through another state-run program. This means that if you are a owner of a tax credit property, or if you've received home funds, you are able to go through our application process without submitting the competitive documents that other non-LIHTC units have to submit. So all you have to do is submit the application form, which we'll cover momentarily, and that will apply to any existing property or any new construction property. And when I say new construction, I mean a property that has not yet started construction. The second group of eligible applicants are any LIHTC building that was awarded a tax credit before 2021 or any other existing unit. So including those who have not received any other DCA financing. For that second bucket, you'll need to submit the application form and our competitive package so we can review your application competitively. The third group of properties that is eligible is properties who are applying for tax credit for a future cycle. So if you are a development entity and you're thinking about putting in a 4% application, based on HUD's recent changes in the guidance, we are now allowed to preliminarily commit project-based vouchers to the property contingent upon your tax credit award. And so if that's you, all you have to do is submit the application form and indicate which cycle you plan on applying for a tax credit. This is what the application form looks like. We've got two different documents on the website. One says the PBV application, one says the application form. This form is also in the appendix of the actual application document, but this is the document that you need to submit if you're a tax credit property. It's about 3 pages long. If you're another property or a tax credit property that was awarded before 2021, you will have to submit this application and the corresponding competitive requirements. So who doesn't yet qualify? Anybody who started construction. If you are in the middle of construction, HUD is very clear that we cannot award properties until they have completed construction. So if you have a certificate of occupancy date before 12/1, you are classified as a completed project under DCA PBV, and so you can go ahead and apply. But if you've just broken ground, you'll need to wait until the project is completed and then apply in a future solicitation round. Other projects who don't yet qualify are any planned developments that have not received a competitive DCA award. We're currently working with some local governments to figure out if there are opportunities for us to coordinate project-based vouchers in the local approval process. But that is for a future solicitation round. Just wanted to make you all aware that that will potentially be an option in the future. So our target timeline, and I want to be clear about our target goal timeline here, because there's a lot of things that can contribute to delays in this process. So for any existing property, whether you've received a recent tax credit award, an older tax credit award, or no previous competitive award, your applications are due August 30th. So you'll submit those to the DCA_PBV at dca.ga.gov email address. And we'll begin reviewing those applications in September. If you are a current tax credit awardee, right? So the first bucket, the 2021 to current, we can review those applications on a rolling basis, but all competitive applications will be reviewed in September. Due diligence, which is basically like us confirming that the property meets our standards, will take place in September and October. That will include an environmental review if you're not a tax credit development, and inspections for all of the units that you're applying for. And then our leasing and eligibility determination process will take place after that. So that will include rent determinations, and especially if you're leasing in place with the tenants that are already in the units, we'll begin the eligibility process and setting up your wait list then. For new construction properties, the target timeline is your applications are due September 23rd. So you've got an additional month to apply. That includes any planned LIHTC applicant. So if you are planning on submitting in the 4% round, you have until September 23rd to get us your application. We, again, will review which applications qualify and provide those preliminary commitments for planned LIHTC applications by September 30th. And then we'll begin the due diligence process. After the agreements take place, so after we have an agreement for a housing assistance payment contract in place, we'll conduct any additional due diligence that's needed, which will include inspections, eligibility determinations, etc. I promise we'll get to all the questions at the end, folks. I know there's lots of questions in the chat. Okay, so the competitive criteria that we will use to review your applications, if you are a non-LIHTC property or if you're a pre-2021 LIHTC property. We are going to be evaluating your property based on immediate occupancy and availability. This means if you have tenants that are already existing, living in the units, and they qualify for our program, you will receive a higher point allocation. If you have units that might not have tenants in them, but they are immediately available to be leased, you will have another opportunity to receive points. So we're really prioritizing immediate use in this application round. The other, another scoring section is on project size and supportive services. And our team covered this a little bit, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. Our federal regulations prevent us from awarding properties with more than 25% of their units as project-based units unless they provide supportive services on site. And there are a lot of examples of what supportive services could be, some of which are included in our application. But DCA will rely on the property to demonstrate what those supportive services are and how they serve that resident population. We will maintain the ability to review that narrative as part of your competitive application and determine whether or not that is justifiably meeting the needs of the residents as identified. So if, let's say, you've got a property with 100 units and you want 50 of them to be project-based vouchers, we would need you to identify what your tenant population is and what their outstanding service needs are, and provide us with documentation that shows that you have an agreement with a service provider or you are staffing a service coordinator to address those supportive services needs. This applies to all properties other than our senior properties. So senior properties are allowed to be project-based beyond the 25% limit without supportive services. But if that property sounds like you, please reach out to us before you're submitting an application. We'll also award points based on property location. So we've got some really key things that are highlighted in our application. But property location is basically just your geographical proximity to really key amenities. So things like groceries, schools, workplace centers, whether there's transportation on site. If you think about our qualified allocation plans, community transportation options section, we're really looking at similar things here. And the application outlines our expectations for what we plan for you all to submit. But that should not be more than a one-page summary of your proximity to those community benefits. And then the last section that we will score on is unit composition. We have a high demand for larger units. We have tenants who are at the max of what their contracted rent can be for a 2-bedroom unit, and their subsidy standard is pushing them into a 3-bedroom unit. And so we are hoping to contract with property owners who are willing to put aside some of their 3- and 4-bedroom units for project-based vouchers. And so we will award more points for more of your units that are larger. We'll also award some points for 1-bedroom units because that is, as we know, a need across the country for our Housing Choice Voucher program. All right, so that was a review of this year's competitive cycle, and we'll of course answer questions at the end. But at this point, we'll talk through the initial award process and what you can expect after you've submitted an application and it's been reviewed or scored. So for new LIHTC construction, this is any property that is submitting an application and they haven't yet started construction, right? You will have an environmental review already done through your tax credit process, so you don't have to worry about that being an additional hurdle. Your subsidy layering review process will be conducted as part of the underwriting process for your award. I see Mitch on my screen right now, and he and Ryan and I are working closely together to make sure those timelines are aligned so that properties who are going through the tax credit process under the new format do not have to go through the underwriting process twice after they've been awarded project-based vouchers. So we will definitely be coordinating internally on that to speed up that process. The result of this due diligence review will be an agreement to enter a housing assistance payment contract. So that means that we are agreeing, basically committing that once you finish construction, once you've gotten your tax credit, we will then move to a housing assistance payment contract for the units that you identified as part of your application. For existing properties, the due diligence process will look like an environmental review if you're not a LIHTC property. So if you have received a tax credit award, we've already done an environmental review for you through our tax credit program, and we aren't going to have to do another one. But if you're a new property, we just have a few things that we want to make sure that are consistent with federal guidelines so that we're placing tenants in the most environmentally secure locations that we can. You'll have inspections done. You'll have rent determination and rent comps done. We'll set up your wait list with your tenant selection plan. And then you'll determine eligibility for any in-place tenants. And after that, you'll have a executed housing assistance payment contract, and you can expect payments from DCA. For projects that are applying for LIHTC, so this is anybody in that third bucket who might be applying for a future 4% or a future 9% round. We will be able to award a preliminary commitment. And then after that preliminary commitment, you can apply for the tax credit. And I know there's now the option for you guys to claim points through those preliminary commitments. And so that is now opening up a process for us to be able to make sure that those points are awardable from DCA's balance of state side. So if you then get a LIHTC award, right, from our preliminary commitment, you will then be able to begin construction, right? But before that, we'll translate your preliminary commitment into an AHAP. So you'll basically go from in the third bucket back over to being in the first bucket and go through this due diligence process before your AHAP is committed. All right, so I mentioned the environmental review for the non-LIHTC properties. And the three things that we'll be looking at are your airport runway clear zones and accident potential is clear. Your coastal barrier resource protection is identified. This applies to any properties that are on the coast, and we'll probably be familiar with you guys as developers for the federal requirements there. And then if you're in a flood zone, we've got some flood insurance requirements. Very rarely we have mitigation steps that are needed, but our environmental review team and federal compliance team will work with you on identifying what information we need there. For the subsidy layering review, this only applies to new construction or planned developments. And we appreciate all of our partners last year who went through this process with us as we figured out exactly what the federal guidance was around this. And we also appreciate our partners at the Department of Housing and Urban Development for clarifying in the guidance around when subsidy layering reviews are required. But we are confirming this only applies to new construction. So if you are a new construction deal applying for our project-based vouchers, we'll, like I mentioned earlier, align our underwriting timelines with your LIHTC application. And the two things to be most aware of in this process are that your debt coverage ratio for our subsidy layering review process needs to be between 1.1 and 1.45. Our underwriting team will talk through that with you, but that's the target and based on HUD's safe harbor standards. And also your cash flow cannot be more than 10% of your operating expenses. We've seen this cash flow requirement be an issue in our subsidy layering review. And so I want to encourage you all to think through the need for project-based vouchers and how to utilize any additional cash flow to support the residents that you are serving. For example, if you are going above the 10% cash flow requirement, there could be an opportunity for you to hire an additional service coordinator on site or provide some supportive services for those extremely low income residents who you might be housing as part of our project-based voucher waitlist. There's also opportunity for you to add funding to your unit maintenance reserves, right? So that in the event that the units need some additional care, some TLC after tenants move out, you can take care of them that way. So really encourage you guys to be proactive on the LIHTC developer side and address that 10% cash flow requirement before you finish your application with Mitch's team. The other documents that will be required for the subsidy layering review, there's a couple things that will be new for our tax credit partners. This project description and application, we'll work with you on that. And then the HUD form 2880 is required. And so we can provide you with that, but we want everyone to have a heads up that that is what we'll be looking for. All right, so I'm going to pause and pass it over to Elise, who is our awesome inspections manager. Elise, you want to take it away around inspections and housing quality standards?
Sure. Thank you, guys. So I'm basically going to go over our common fail items that we find when we do our inspections. Some of the things that we find are smoke detectors not working, batteries missing, or not in the required locations. Also with carbon monoxide detectors, what we find it's that they're not in the proper location either. Right now, they're basically needed on each level of the home. For smoke detectors, they're going to be required in each living space, which would be bedrooms and also the living room. GFCI outlets, any outlets next to a water source needs to be GFCI protected. So we find that a lot of those aren't working properly, so they need to be installed and working properly near each water source. Bedrooms, they must have a window and a door, two forms of egress, and that window needs to lead to the outside of the unit. Same with the living room, it's considered a sleeping area, so a living room is required to have a window, and that window needs to be lead to the outside. Gas burners, they need to light on their own. You cannot use matches or a lighter to light a gas stove. In occupied units, things that we're finding is that we're unable to access outlets and things that we need to conduct the inspection. Double key locks are not required, cannot be in the unit. And then also broken or missing outlet covers. So those need to be on there and it cannot be broken either. Also, fire extinguishers, if they're there, they have to be within the date. And also, if there was one there before, there has to be one there. So you can't just remove it because it's out of date. You have to replace it with a new fire extinguisher. Tripping hazards, uneven pavement, bunched up carpet, or torn linoleum are considered tripping hazards. Also, if there's a window, the window must open and close properly and not slam shut, and they also must be able to lock. So those are the most common things that we find when we do our inspections. So we provided the checklist there for you. If units are inspected by LIHTC within the last 6 months, we could use that inspection and instead of having to do another one. If the property has received a certificate of occupancy in the last 90 days before lease up and no other tenant lived in the unit, we can use that certificate of occupancy. Leased in place units, we will give them 2 weeks or 15-day notice before we come out and do the inspection to make sure that they're available to let us in to conduct the inspection. Vacant units or LIHTC units without scheduled inspections will be scheduled in September through November as inspectors are available. And if the unit fails, we give up to 30 days to make improvements and conduct the reinspection of the unit.
Thanks, Elise. I'll pass it over to Ryan to talk through the due diligence process around rent determination. I believe there was a question in the chat about this, Ryan, so very timely.
Okay. So I mentioned previously that we use the 110% of the small area fair market rent as our payment standard. So to determine reasonable rent, we're going to look at where the property is located, what amenities are included, the year that it was constructed, square footage of the unit, and then use that data to compare it to other units, again, within a reasonable distance from that property. And that's how we come up with when you make your rent request. So let's say you request $1,000 for a 1 bedroom. If the average of the units that we find comparable in that area don't meet or exceed $1,000, we would have to ask you to bring that rent down to that comparable rate. So the rent requested by the owner, again, is what you guys determine your unit's worth. We'll make a counter offer in the event it's not comparable. The rent, once we establish a rent at the initial contract, again, I'll use the $1,000 example. If we execute the HAP contract for $1,000 for your 1 or 2 bedroom unit, those rents will be used for an entire year. You'll be eligible to request an increase after the first term of the HAP contract. Payments cannot occur before the HAP contract's executed, regardless if they're in place or newly admitted to the program. So if the HAP contract is effective September 1st, payments will not proceed that date. Laura, was there something specifically you want me to cover from the question in the chat? I didn't catch it.
No, I think that was good. They were asking
Okay.
about the rent comp tool that we use. So
Okay. Yeah, we use a third party provider that in the event we do not find those comps, you will have an opportunity to provide your own comps that will add to the system to make sure we're capturing all the data available in your area. So again, in the event it does not comp, we're not just going to deny it. We'll give you the opportunity to provide some of your own comps.
yeah, and then one other thing to clarify too, and we'll go over this when we talk about the eligibility determination process too, but especially for our leasing in place units and especially for our tax credit partners, the eligibility determination process can really take a lot of time if we don't have all the documents that are required. And there are other documents outside of what's required from the tax credit program for tenants to submit. And so I know this has been really challenging for a lot of our existing partners, but this is, of course, another federal program that has different requirements than our tax credit program. And we're doing our part to make sure that all those things align. But there are some new additional documents, and it can really, really hold things up if we don't have everything that we need from the tenants in a timely manner.
Thank you, Laura. So for eligibility determination, we have 2 teams. We have one team out of the North office and one on the South. So this is going to be after we get through the due diligence process, around the time we're ready to execute the contract for the property. We have the Northern team, which is Dallery Beard, who's the eligibility manager. Nicole Brooks is the senior specialist, currently assisted by Cahelia and Tolise, who are the specialists. And then the South region.
Hey, Ryan, can we get Cahelia, Talise, Nicole, if you guys are on the call, will you just raise your hands so folks can see your face and say hi? These are the folks who you'll be working with if you're in the North region on eligibility determination process.
Thank you, Laura. And we also have our Southern office team, which is led by Teresa Carter as the manager, Zenobia Ward, Megan Pierce, and Christy Sills being one of our leads. They'll be handling all the incoming applications for assistance out of our Southern regional office. With those names being mentioned, we do have a part of our strategic plan is to grow these teams so that the process is effortless and we can not only streamline the process, but have enough hands on the project to ensure timely payments of the property, as well as eligibility determinations. So for lease in place tenants, those that are there before the HAP contract is executed, will meet on site to meet with property management, go over the application process, and then hand it off to property management to have the application completed and submitted back to DCA. In the event an on-site meeting is not feasible, or there's delays in scheduling, we will also offer it to be done virtually. For new tenants, those that are being pulled from the wait list, the property will notify DCA of the vacancy, select the name, and then DCA will require documentation from that new applicant.
Yeah, and folks, I think we've got Teresa and Zenobia, Christy, Megan maybe on the call. If you guys just want to raise your hands if you're on camera so folks can see you, that'd be great. Yeah, awesome. Thanks team for doing that.
Thank you, guys. So, lease in place eligibility verification can take up to 60 days or more, depending on if we receive the documents. It's important. Our teams are going to stress to the applicants what exactly is needed and follow up with the families as well. It's key that the properties support us in collecting this documentation to ensure timely payments. Um, on the screen, you'll see a list of documents that are required to determine eligibility within housing choice voucher for project-based vouchers, I'm sorry. This also applies for future residents. So those being pulled from the wait list, they'll need the same exact documents to provide to us to ensure that they are eligible. One of the key things, families may show up as suitable based on your property's tenant selection plan and your suitability criteria. They still may not meet DCA's eligibility requirements. Generally, that would be based on criminal background. Usually, properties tend to have a stricter criminal background criteria than we do, but we do have 2 grounds for automatic denial for applicants, which is registered sex offenders, lifetime registered sex offenders, as well as the production of methamphetamines on publicly assisted property. But also, if a family is currently subsidized by another PHA or on another housing program, they won't be eligible until they clear their name off of that other subsidy. And if they owe another housing authority or housing program for overpaid subsidy, they may also be ineligible. Those determinations are made relatively quickly. So when you do send those families to us, we'll notify you as soon as possible. We don't wait the full 60 days. Those pre-screening checks we do immediately so that we don't waste time moving forward with the ineligible family.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this also momentarily when we talk about the new policy around project-based vouchers where properties can manage their wait lists on site. But it could be helpful for you guys to keep in mind that these are the types of things that we will need on our eligibility team. So as you're establishing your wait list, it might be a good idea to proactively collect some of this documentation to help speed up that process. One thing that we have seen through this last cycle is that sometimes we might have a property that has planned to lease in place a particular unit, and then for whatever reason, that tenant doesn't qualify. But based on our project-based voucher process, we are reviewing your application at the project or at the property level and not at the specific unit level. That means that if you have a tenant that in a unit where they don't pass eligibility determination, you're able to then move that potential project-based voucher to another unit within your property. And it can also be a different size unit within your property. If it's the same size, the rent will stay the same, and we'll just need a new inspection and then process eligibility determination for that specific lease in place tenant. If it's a different size, we'll have to start back at the rent determination process to figure out the rent for that unit if it's a size other than something else in your application. And then we'll, of course, conduct another inspection and the eligibility determination process. I want to flag that if even one tenant in your application is not eligible, this will add time to the review. And so we're doing our best to make sure that we're processing everybody on the same timeline and getting everyone and their payments ready to go as quickly as possible. But it can be challenging when our project-based voucher HAP contract at the property level is for a total number of units when we don't have all of the units ready to go at any given time. And so it's really important for us to work together to make sure we're clear about those timelines and for you guys to help us with providing all the documentation that we need to process eligibility. Okay, so waitlist management. Ryan and I are going to tag team this one. This is new, right? For pretty much most project-based voucher programs across the country. I know other folks who are already MTW might have already implemented this, but HUD is now allowing us to let our project-based voucher properties manage their own wait lists. And DCA's policy is going to be that you have to meet our administrative plan and fair housing requirements. So basically, you have to serve the same population that we're serving. You're able to select to use our preferences and priority preferences that are in the administrative plan. But when you're applying, we'll need you to put together a tenant selection plan for your project-based voucher units so that we know how you're going to fill those units when they become available. This will also include any agreements or MOUs that you have with other referral entities that might be helping push applicants into your units. We want to see those in place as part of your tenant selection plan. So our plan is that we will post your specific tenant selection plans, your waitlist protocol, how to apply on our website for all of our properties. This will also end up applying to all of our existing properties too, if any of our current partners are on the call. But our team will end up conducting regular audits just to ensure that the waitlist that you're managing is compliant with our process. And so we're still figuring out exactly what that audit process will look like, but you can expect to hear from our waitlist compliance team probably once a year. The other piece about our waitlist process that's important to note is that, of course, you can have your waitlist, but we still have to process eligibility. And so, like I mentioned earlier, it could be helpful for you guys to make sure that all of those documents that we require on the eligibility side are collected during your waitlist establishment. Ryan, what am I missing? I feel like I'm missing something important.
I don't think you missed anything. I feel like everything is covered as far as what we know now. Of course, this is a new process for DCA for our HCV program. We will set kind of parameters or guidelines for properties to manage their own wait lists. And we will adopt your tenant selection plan as part of our administrative plan. Your tenant selection plan is part of our administrative plan. So that will be a record shared to applicants before applying. But other than that, I don't think you missed anything.
I think the only other thing is the first time you set up your wait list, like when you become a new project-based voucher property, we will plan to notify all of the applicants on our existing housing choice voucher wait list about your property coming online in case any of those individuals would qualify for the tenant selection plan that you've established at your property. All right. So now for questions, and there are a lot of them in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and dive in at a high level to some of these that kept coming up recurrently, and then try to address all the other specific ones. The first thing I want to address is for any residents that we have on the call or people that are needing assistance. Thanks so much for joining today. And I apologize if you've been on this whole call, like waiting to ask this question. This is not targeted, this information session is not targeted for residents specifically, but you might be able to qualify for any of the future project-based voucher properties that come online. And so as we establish those wait lists with our project-based voucher partners, we will put information out publicly when those wait lists are being established so that you might be able to join. So that is probably the most relevant potential opportunity for assistance. And I apologize that it is not an immediate need. If you are a resident who needs immediate assistance, please email the DCA_PBV@dca.ga.gov email address. And my team can work to connect you with any relevant resources that you might be able to qualify for. In that email, please also include what county you're located in, because we've got different providers providing services in different counties. Okay, the other question that I saw that kept coming up, Ryan, was the number of units. So at this time, the way that we manage our project-based voucher portfolio is best designed for larger properties or property management companies or a portfolio of properties. And so we require there to be a 15-unit minimum. If you're a property owner who, let's say maybe you own 10 different 10-unit rentals across a couple of counties, you're able to apply with a portfolio of your units. So let's say maybe you pick 5 at each property that would then be project-based. But we reserve the right to figure out whether that portfolio application works best for our processes. And we also reserve the right to waive those requirements for any specific partner. That's outlined in our application, and I'm happy to answer specific questions on a case-by-case basis around that at the DCA _PBV email address.
To
Go
piggyback
ahead,
off
Ryan.
that really quickly, because I did see several questions pertain. It appears that there's a lot of landlords interested in tenant basing or accepting tenant-based vouchers. If you are, please reach out to us and we can connect you with our landlord liaison, who's actually on the call currently, Miss Marie Sullivan. We can get you connected with her and she can assist you with getting your properties listed for tenant-based vouchers. So just as a reminder, project-based vouchers generally are applied to apartment complexes or multi-family projects. It's not for the landlord who may own 5 houses that they're looking to put on the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm excited. If you are a landlord and you want to participate, I put Marie's email in the chat. So definitely reach out. We're excited to have you and hope to partner with you too. Okay, I'm going up to the top and plan now to just scroll through all of the remaining questions. So can you define supportive services? I think I saw a couple other questions around this. So our expectation around supportive services for those properties who are project basing or proposing to project base more than 25% of their units is that that the services that are offered are relevant to the population that you're serving. So examples of things that it could look like: housing case management, employment assistance, workforce development, childcare, behavioral health services, other kind of healthcare access, anything that promotes economic security, well-being, and community connectedness. All of those things, it really depends on your resident population, right? And so as you're applying and putting together a proposal for what supportive services you want to provide, we really will be evaluating how well you've evaluated what the resident population will be and what the needs are. All right, another question around handicap accessible units. We are happy to project base handicap accessible units. And if you have some handicap accessible units within your property that you want to include as project base, we've got an indication on our application where you can indicate that those are handicap accessible. You can look up the small area fair market rent on HUD's website. Ryan or Kiwana, can one of you guys drop that in the chat for Kirsten Benson?
Yes, I'll drop that in the chat as well as our payment standards, because the small area fair market rent is set by HUD. Our payment standards is where we add the 110%. We have it broken down by county and zip code. So I'll include both in the chat.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Yeah, Maureen, I think we answered your question on the rent comp tool. Yes, this video will be automatically emailed to everyone in addition to a copy of the application. So I got everyone's email addresses and contact information from the attendee list. So I'll expect to send it there, and it will also be posted on DCA's website. Maureen, I see your question around Fulton County. I think we're all in the process of figuring out exactly what that will look like with Fulton County. And at this time, we don't have any more information to share with the area that's outside of the Atlanta Housing's jurisdiction. But in the event that that changes, we'll make sure to share information with this list and publicly around that opportunity. The expected timeline of finalizing an MOU with all of our partners, the ones that we listed, is hopeful this application cycle, right? Our application indicates that if we have an active MOU live before the application deadline, then you can apply. Rod, I would encourage you to reach out to the folks at Atlanta Housing and make sure that you are coordinating with them if you're interested in some of your properties project-based units with us. We are giving all of our housing authority partners the right of refusal. So if a property applies and it doesn't meet their deconcentrating poverty goals or other standards, then we will not be able to move forward with partnership. So I really encourage you all, if you're thinking about applying in one of those partner jurisdictions, to work closely with the housing authority. Kirsten, there is not currently a max limit per organization over the state or for the MSA. There is, however, a max limit for the number of project-based vouchers that we'll award within our partnering jurisdictions. So that's anybody that Ryan talked about on this slide that's not in the balance of state. And we'll only award about 10% of our current PBV allocation within those areas, because we want to make sure that we're prioritizing our existing jurisdiction and offering housing options there. In the Valdosta area, we would be happy to project-based properties. We have some already live. And so Rita, if you've got questions about specifics, feel free to reach out to our DCA_PBV email. The maximum amount of PBV available per project, as we said, right, it has to be a minimum of 15 units and no more than 25% of your units, unless you're offering supportive services. Belinda, do we have to submit for each individual property? Yes. So we need an application form for each individual property. You'll see based on the application that there's some details that we need to confirm that are federal requirements about each one, including whether or not the property meets site and neighborhood standards and whether or not it meets our deconcentrating poverty goals. Brandon, if we are applying under DCA's 4% competitive round, do we also need to submit the 15-year pro forma, detailed operating statements? These are all listed under Section 5 of the RFP. No, Brandon, you do not. So that's all something that you'd submit as part of the tax credit award process. But if you're applying as a potential tax credit project, all you have to do is submit the application form in order for us to make a preliminary commitment. Okay, Kirsten, are you still on the call? I'm seeing your question around the third bucket, including projects not yet under construction and no LIHTC yet. Do you want to clarify, or if I don't hear from you, I'm expecting that we've already clarified. All right, we've already clarified. A property owner with scattered sites can apply. If you've got multiple duplexes and you want to apply, we would encourage you to submit an application competitively. I will say that the supportive services might be challenging for that type of agreement. So if you've got specific questions, Anita Smith-Dixon, we're happy to answer at the DCA_PBV@dca.ga.gov email. All right, I'm going through to see if there's any other questions we haven't addressed. Ryan and Kiwana, do you guys see any?
I'm scrolling as well, kind of dropping written responses as I see them.
Because I'm the question asker, Mitch can tell you all about it.
Yeah, Marie, great.
With the, we have a project that we submitted an application for LIHTC and was awarded in it was a 2020 project, but because of what was going on with LIHTC at that time, the letter of determination wasn't issued until 2021. So would that be in that pre-2020 pool or the post-2021 pool?
Yeah, it would be in the post 2021 pool. So anything, it's your final award letter is what we use.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm scrolling down further. someone asked about the tenant being required to pay a portion of the rent with our tax credit program. Yes, so tenants, based on their income, pay a portion of their rent. As Ryan and Kiwana mentioned earlier, if the tenant has no income, they don't end up paying a portion of the rent, but that adjusts based on how much income that they're making. And with our tax credit program, right now they're limited in the total amount of rent that they can receive from tenants based on the rent restrictions that are on their units. But with this project, they're able to project based so that they could get a market rate rent for a unit that was previously restricted at a lower rent. Does the environmental review process for existing properties depend on property age or time of last environmental inspection? So for all non-LIHTC existing properties, you've got to get an environmental review. If you're a LIHTC building that maybe had one done 12 years ago, our team will determine whether or not there's an additional environmental review that's needed on a case-by-case basis. I'm not seeing others. Tiny homes are eligible to apply. So if you've got a tiny home or cottage development, we would encourage you to apply. There's a list in our user guide, which I'll send out, of ineligible units, but those things are typically things like existing public housing, etc. So would definitely encourage you to apply with non-traditional multifamily housing options. Okay, I'm seeing a question from Dawn Ryan. It says there are no tenants who meet the rent burden criteria, which means that the maximum payment will be awarded instead of funds taking out to provide for utilities. Can you help me decipher and jump in there?
I am scrolling to read it. Okay, for this program, there are no tenants who meet the rent burden criteria, which means that the maximum payment will be awarded instead of funds taken out to provide for utilities. So we do have a minimum rent that we apply per HUD, which is $50. So if when we establish the contract rent plus the utility allowance, and the family's zero income, the $50 minimum rent will be deducted from the utility allowance. So if their utility allowance is $98, the family will still receive a $48 utility allowance, but rent will be 100% covered. I hope that, does that answer your question?
I'm assuming yes. And if not, please put another question in the chat. There are no limits to using these PBVs and other HUD allocated project-based vouchers. So if you've got a property that has project-based vouchers from one housing authority, and we now have a partnership with that housing authority, we're also able to provide project-based voucher assistance to that property.
Another quick thing I do want to add for our partnering jurisdictions, if you have questions about their payment standards, because when we posted our payment standards last year for 2024, we weren't anticipating entering MOUs with the neighboring jurisdictions. So more than likely, or most of those that we've spoken to, they're already using the 110% payment standards in their area. So you can expect us to mimic what they're already using for our rent determinations.
Hi, Rochelle. I'm seeing your question around the approximate amount of PBVs. We covered that earlier in the presentation, and I'll try to go back to that slide, but we do not have a set amount other than what we are, what our total allocation is, which is around 3,500 units for the 20% of our total allocation, and an additional 10% of our total allocation, so around 1,700 units for supportive housing. Craig, I'm seeing your question around USDA rental assistance. We cannot award units specifically who are receiving USDA rental assistance with project-based vouchers, but we can award properties who receive other type of rental assistance with project-based vouchers. And so I would be happy to talk with you about that specific case if you'll email DCA_PBV@dca.ga.gov. Kirsten, if a project is applying for LIHTC and is not yet under construction, it does fit in the third bucket. Anita, yes, you would need to just submit an application form and indicate that you are applying for the 4% tax credit. Craig, I think we already answered that question. The 15 unit minimum is the entire project and not bedroom specific. So it needs to be 15 units, not 15 bedrooms. Kamashia, we do not currently have any tiny home or cottages that are project based, but we are open to receiving applications from those developments. All right, that's all the questions that were in the chat. We'll now open it up if anybody wants to ask a verbal question before we close today. Yeah, Abington Linwood, feel free.
Yes, ma'am. I just have a quick question. I have tenants here that do receive the voucher, but I have some tenants, and this may not be the right place to ask it, but I have some tenants that really need some help. And I don't really know where to send them, because when I go to the DCA website, it says it's moved. And do we receive emails when applications are open? I mean, how do we find that out for our residents?
So we did open a wait list last year for tenant-based selection. It's now closed. So DCA does not currently have, or HCV does not currently have any open tenant-based wait lists. However, as Laura mentioned earlier, there are some resources based on county that that we can connect tenants to. For now, I would recommend calling our HCV call center or the DCA main number for more resources, and I'll drop those phone numbers in the chat.
Okay.
Laura,
Thank
is
you.
there anything you want to add?
Yeah. No, that's it. I've just got a few that, yeah, I never know when the waiting list is open. And if you could actually drop the, maybe a link to where I could send the residents where they could keep an eye on the waiting list, because it's a little confusing, especially for them, you know, well, I don't know where to go. And then you have this one thing went around for Georgia a few months ago saying that Section 8 was open, and people were sharing it on Facebook, and I had residents calling me. So I don't really know where to send them.
Yeah, we were made aware of that. That was that had no ties to Georgia DCA, even though our name was placed on there.
Right.
What I would recommend, and this is to anybody looking for housing resources, is to check HUD's website often. You can look in HUD's website by state, and it'll let you know when wait lists are open. And I believe with HUD's website, you can sign up for alerts. But I will definitely share some information in the chat with contact phone numbers, the website, as well as we have a help center with a FAQ section, as well as a way to connect with some of our agents via chat or email ticketing, where we now have a team that is designed to assist with general questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other remaining questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. As promised, you'll get this recording, the application form, and user guide in your email. And it will also be posted on DCA's website. So if there are email challenges after the call, make sure to check the website. We are really excited about the possibility of partnering with you all on this. And if there are any other additional questions that you have, feel free to reach out to that email address that I mentioned, and I'll put it in the chat. And we hope to hear from you all and see some of your applications submitted. Thanks, everybody.